And I can't emphasize enough about how the idea that you're in a club and you just hung on enough to get a scholarship and you stayed in, quite possibly you could turn that around and become the best player in the group, sure. But if you're only just sliding over the line into a club and you're always going to be fighting to get recognition and position and opportunity, compared to going to another club where you are literally succeeding from the outset because you have something they need and something they're looking for, and perhaps it's a different level, but you become a different prospect really for the club. And I think that's what I have really appreciated with moving to be engaging now with 2 championship clubs.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Boots, and I'm joined today by Kate Iorpenda. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Marcia. Nice to see you.
Oh, you too. I'm really excited to talk to you. We met very recently at one of our first ever Industry Insights event. But I was super impressed that you drove all the way from Brighton to be there.
I did. And got home around 1 a.m, but it was worth it.
Oh, I honestly, I was worried about it. I was like, yeah, she's driving all the way back to Brighton. And it was like after 9, we finally finished the event and we were up to have a bit of networking. And you were still there, like mingling with everyone. I was like, wow, this is interesting.
I couldn't tear myself away, but yeah, I made it home safely. It was worth it. Very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being there. And I want to get into you asked some really good questions and made some great comments at the event. So I'm going to get into that a bit later. But for now, just sort of, if you tell us a bit about your family setup and your 2 young sons in football, just tell me a bit about their initial journey. And
okay. So I've got 2 sons. One is just turned 17 today, and another one that is about to turn 19. And they've both been in academy football since they were sort of pre-academy from sort of age. Tom was started around 7, and George started around 8 years old. And they were at Brighton in our local club, and had 10 fantastic years playing right the way up until under 16s.
Amazing. So tell me about you talked about 10 fantastic years. I love to hear that because quite often when people talk about academy football, is you hear the horror stories. It was a nightmare. It was brutal. It was what was great about it for you and your family?
I think for me it was just what an amazing set of experiences. I think for both of the boys, they thrived there. They loved their group. They loved most of their coaches. They had great role models. They got to go on trips and tours. They played football, which they just wanted to play all the time. And I just think that it was a really exciting time for them to have this. It was a great structure to their lives as well. And I really enjoyed that structure, I have to be honest. It was tiring. It was exhausting. I've watched a few of the other podcasts. I can share in so many of those feelings about being in cars and doing multiple journeys. But I loved meeting the other parents. I loved just watching them, to be honest. I love watching them play. It's just so much fun, and watching the other kids play. So I think for us, it was just a really nice part of life outside of school and our local area. And it was just, they met different children and they got to learn so many things about themselves and learned skills. They had experiences like, lots of outside speakers that came in. They did videos. Tom did some advertising for the club. They had so many fun experiences. And I know for both of them, going on the international tours were just, fantastic. They loved going and staying in hotels, something we don't do as a family very often. And they get to go and, have the opportunity to meet other teams that they've never played before. They loved going to play European teams, for example. So it was just such a range of experiences that I just don't think they could have got anywhere else. And yet at the same time, it just was an amazing opportunity to develop their football and create really lasting relationships with teammates that, many of them that they still have today, even though they're not with that group anymore. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't come without stresses and tribulations, but yeah, overall, it was an amazing 10 years and I would do it all again in a heartbeat.
Beautiful. And so just talking a bit about the club as well, if you don't mind. And I know that Brighton are known as quite a forward-thinking club, and in terms of their holistic development and the way they take care of the kids. Would you say that is true of Brighton?
Yeah, I think 10 years, you've seen massive development. So I think there's been a huge amount of change there. And, before when we started, there wasn't the stadium, there wasn't the training ground. So things have really changed. But I think we've had a good experience with the education and the sort of day release program. The boys both were able to participate in that. And they've had, being a well-funded club, they've had those opportunities to get involved in other activities and travel and so on, which I'm sure many other kids in other academies don't get. So, they've been really privileged in that way.
Yeah, fantastic. And Kate, just take us back to the relationship maybe that you or your husband have with football. Has that been an influence in the boys and their journey at all?
Yeah, probably would be. So my husband was a football coach, so it started from the very beginning. And I think, it was from the day I remember Tom was born, he was sort of given some kind of T-shirt that said something about dribbling. And, there was all of these motifs around a new baby and lots of football imagery. So I think the moment they were up on their feet, they were playing with football and their dad has done loads and loads of training with them over the years and they just enjoyed it, So I think from that point of view, they've had an expert in the house and they've had somebody who's been very passionate about them playing and playing well. But at the same time, he's always been he's let the club get on with it. He's let the coaches get on with it. He's never really got deeply involved from that point of view. He's stepped back from it. And I was doing all the driving, all of the meetings, all of the kind of, watching of the games, because he had his own teams as well at the time to watch. So I think from my point of view, I've never been in elite sport, but I've enjoyed sport and I've enjoyed watching sport as a kid and growing up, and so I've loved football and I've just always loved it. I never ever felt like, oh, I've got to go and watch another game. People used to say to me, oh, gosh, you must get so fed up on the sideline. I was like, never, just never. Loved it. So I mean, I even go and watch other people's children now because my children left home. So I think I'm perhaps different from some parents in that it feels like it's a duty or it's a lot of time taken out, especially if you have other kids. But I think with both of them, I used to stand in between two pitches and watch one and then turn around and watch the other. So for me, although I wasn't involved in football, it's always been something I've really enjoyed.
That's beautiful to hear, actually. And I know you sort of talking about your husband and his coaching, and you were saying that he sort of, stepped back from that. How easy or not has that been for him, knowing so much about the industry and sort of the development pathways? And how have you managed to?
I think he's found that. I mean, I can't talk on his behalf, but my sense of it is that he respects that the academy had the professional coaches and that he very much saw that they were doing their job and that he does his job with his team and that he can't really be there giving an opinion to anybody about his own children when he's not the one coaching them. So he would leave that to, I mean, he had plenty to say to them when he was coaching them himself, or they're doing sessions in the holidays. And of course, and he watches all their games. Like now we watch them online, and that's a really good opportunity for him to have discussions with them about things that he notices in the game. But he was never the person that I think some people think, perhaps, especially if you know football, would be there in the review meeting saying, right, I'd just like to talk about how well you're training him on his left foot, or, you know, and I think you're using him in the wrong position. He just didn't do any of that. He just really respected the club were in charge, basically. And I think both of us, that was the way we left the club to do the job. And so I think I don't think he found it too difficult. I think what he found difficult was probably missing out on watching them as much as he would have liked to, but he had responsibilities of his own teams, so he has grassroots teams that he set up, which were the same age as Tom, so up, from sort of 7s up to 18s at one stage. So yeah, wow. He was always busy with other teams.
Yeah, sure. So tell us, Kate, about like your involvement. Obviously, you've been doing a lot of the legwork, as it were, and a lot of us mums are doing it. I mean, probably don't get the credit we deserve. But anyway, to tell us about how that's been for you, and maybe the challenges of that. Did you know what to expect? I know your husband's always been in coaching, but were you aware of what to expect when you enter into that academy, Brian?
No, I mean, I don't think either of us really knew the academy system at all when we started. And I think overall, certainly my approach has always been, and I've heard others say it, is sort of taking each day as it comes. It's not something you can sort of get into and think you know what the end destination is. It really isn't like that. And I know that some people do think that they sign in and they get in at under 9 and there's just a conveyor belt to an end point. And I don't think I ever felt like that. I just saw every bit that we got. If long as they were happy and enjoying it, then that was what was worth being there. But if at any point it wasn't, then we could just stop. It wasn't something, it wasn't a vocation or a career that had to happen. So to me, this was more like, it was an opportunity. It's like an after school activity. And while they're going and they're happy and they enjoy it, all good. So I think at the beginning, I loved talking to people. I'd talk to friends who had older boys who were in and find out about things, but I was literally learning on the job, and I don't think I had anticipated quite how much it would take over my time, and at the time I was working locally, but I was working full time, and I found it really hard because I was the only driver. And I was having to get them to training when officially I'd still be at work. So, I was I arranged adjusted hours. I had to kind of book time off to take them away to trips and so on. So I think that's probably the part I found the hardest. And at one point I did make a decision based on opportunities with work and so on, but the ability to have a flexible work life and work from home as a consultant has given me the freedom, which I'm grateful for every day, which allowed me to get them to training and to be around and cook a meal and so on. But at the same time now, as both of them live away, it gives me the opportunity to travel and go and stay with them and visit them. And I can take my laptop with me. That's just been absolutely brilliant to be able to be flexible, because it is a huge, huge commitment. It really is. And I often spoke to people who, for example, didn't drive, and there was club transport for some kids, But that didn't solve all of the problems. And often they were waiting for minibuses to turn up at garages in South London, to drop kids off late at night, and they'd still have to go and pick them up from there. And I just used to think, how do people manage people with lots of other children who are definitely not interested in football and needed to be at gymnastics or swimming or somewhere else? And how people did that juggle, I don't know. I mean, I was dealing with it in the same place with two boys doing the same thing. But even that was hard because they were on different time schedules. But I think those logistical juggles, and I think I heard one of the previous podcasts, that idea that you get home and somehow come up with a nutritious elite sports like dinner, really is a stretch too far for me. It was always pasta pesto. Oh, should we all have pasta pesto? Yes. So I think those kind of things. And it was funny, I was reflecting with a friend the other day about it, because I started to think, well, my boys didn't learn to do this, or we never did that, or your children are so good at cooking, or your children are so organized. My friend just reminded him and said, you weren't at home much. Like, how do you learn to cook if you're not at home much? And it's true. The boys would come home from school. We would, get ready and then off to training. And often, if the boys were on different training sessions, one would do homework up at the club while the other was training, and vice versa. And so it's true, I couldn't do some of the things that other families would have done. So yeah, I suppose sometimes I feel there are things that I wish we'd done more as a family, but then we did other things, like a trip to
offset.
Absolutely,
like it offsets, doesn't it, in terms of the other experiences that they get through the system. So tell me about, like, obviously you've had to juggle a lot. We talked about those commitments, but in terms of the mindset work, if any, that you've had to work on with your sons, in terms of the journey and what it means and what could happen, the periods where you're having review meetings and, do you stay? Are they going? How have you managed to handle the expectation around the future?
It's quite a difficult question, because I think it's changed over the years depending on where we were with things. So at the beginning, I think the boys just loved playing football. I'm not sure that they had a great plan. I mean, I certainly, I don't know that they were thinking, I'm in an academy and this means I will be a footballer. I think they loved being in that team and they loved playing. And Tom started, and he was there, and George would be on the sideline watching. So it became also part of George's life very quickly, being the sibling that had to come along and watch. So I think, in a sense, I was really grounded. I feel like I've always been really grounded about this, and of course, wanted to still feel ambitious and still feel positive and believe that, if you're good at something, you can really make it a career and you can enjoy it. But I didn't ever feel like it has to be this. And if it's not this, I don't know what he'll do. That for both of them, it was always about, checking in that they're enjoying it. And I think it's interesting because when they start very young, I'm not sure that they remember anything else. They don't remember life before, really. If you think about sort of going into pre-academy at 7, 8 years old, it's hard to say, do you wish you'd done something differently? Because they don't really have any concept of life before. But I never felt that it was something they had to do. So I think as a family, we were always at different stages, when things got harder, or when, as they got older and the sort of bigger decisions came closer, I think we were always like, this is just one part of it. This is just part of a journey. And if there's something else, there's always something else. And sometimes that has to be, you have to finish one thing to start another. It's that whole door opens and closes thing. But that I don't think we ever I don't think we ever felt that it was a must. And therefore, our whole approach to everything else was, you still need to be doing this. And would you like to do gymnastics and basketball? George did a lot of sports, other sports before, and not even sure that he decided perhaps a bit later than Tom that actually he really wanted to focus on the football. So I think I hope that they both felt that they did it because they loved doing it, and it was never something that they had to do. In terms of my expectations, I think I've just really had to learn. Like, I was really curious and I asked loads of questions and I talked to people. And I think for me, a lot of it has been a fascination with an industry that, it does have a lot of connotations around, there's the dark side of football and lots of issues in terms of not really, is it about the children as children, or is it about them as commodities and assets for a club? And I think some of that is a little bit overplayed, but at the same time, I think there are lots of things that the whole system could improve on to make it more so it doesn't have that kind of sense about it. I think there are lots of things that need to change, but I do think that overall, it for me, I began to develop an understanding about the wider side of it, and I met some amazing people and talked to brilliant professionals who just took such good care of the boys, analysts and physios and strength and conditioning coaches that really were interested and engaged with the boys and wanted the best for them. And I just really had that sense that, there's a lot of really well-intentioned people trying to make this as good as it can be. And I think that's what I sort of sought out, was trying to get the best out of it, I suppose. So a lot of curiosity, a lot of asking questions, lots of reading and listening to things. And I feel like one of the reasons I was at your event is because I feel like I'm now really fascinated and passionate, and also really keen to support other parents, because I think you learn so much just by going through those different experiences, and you can't read about them. There's no FA handbook that's going to tell you about academy life. It is, and it's different for everyone as well. So there's nothing that I've been through that I can say this will happen, because how it happens to the next person in the next academy is likely to be very different. But overall, I think we were just enjoying the ride.
And you talked about sort of the questions that you asked and the research that you did. Were there any surprises to you of things that you kind of discovered along the journey that you've been curious
so many
about?
How long have you got?
Share it.
Just let that I think the first surprise for me was when they were very young, and was the parents that are literally on a mission and were ready to sort of almost train their very small children to be fiercely competitive and have no time for anyone else. Like, literally, you need to do this, and really felt like there was a lot of pressure. And I think I hadn't really come across that, of parents putting a lot of pressure on their children, and it just felt kind of uncomfortable. I think the other thing that I found quite interesting when I was when they were young was that I was a primary school teacher, and I was trained on everything is fair, everything is equal, everyone gets a turn. And I taught my children, you need to share your toys, and you need to help each other, and you need to do everything and give everyone a turn. And the experience from the very beginning, you cannot, however great your journey is and experiences in an academy, for me, you can never say it's fair or equal, because it isn't. And I think that is quite a hard lesson very early on, to have a conversation with a 9-year-old who says, how come so-and-so has got the kit already and I haven't? And you have to go, well, it's just the way it is, and that's quite hard, watching the dynamics And there's no question that when a club is really interested in someone, they will make extra efforts. And there was no doubt throughout many, many years that some boys got more benefits than other boys. And that seemed to be acceptable because of maybe circumstances of that particular family, yes, but other times it felt very much that, you know, these children were being courted. So why not give them the kit early so they can say they're part of the club, so that hopefully they pre-sign and then sign as an under-9, or, you know, early scholarships or other incentive that just mean that it's not wrong, but it's hard to explain to a small child how some people are getting things that other people aren't. I mean, in some ways, for my two, particularly for Tom, was that a lot of that, he was one of the ones that got to do a lot of the stuff. And so, you know, I think it was just recognizing that he was doing well at the time and therefore got a lot of the benefits. So, yeah, I think that was quite a surprise to me, and just kind of counter to what I'd learned, you know, about child development and children and schools of children and how to support young people and try and make it equal and fair. And it isn't an equal and fair system, and can't get away from that, really.
No, strongly. So you talked about your own profession in education and child development. What do you think it could be improved in the environment with regards to that?
I think I've seen a massive improvement in overall across the different academies and through football as a whole, with a focus on player care and mental health and you know, the other sides, the sort of the development of a human being. And I think that it really is the club's responsibility, because they spend so much time with these children. So when people say, oh, but it's just about the football, I think, yeah, but it's a bit like a school. Like, you can teach your maths and English, but you're also developing, you're part of the group that are developing this person into healthy, happy adults, right? So the amount of time the club is engaged with them and the amount of adult role models they have at a club, I do think it's really important that there is a real attention to the child as a whole. And so for me, some of the things that I think get missed are an understanding of children's development and their understanding of decisions and the communication with them. So I would say that for both boys, they learn immensely brilliant skills around communication. The way they had to interact with the teams and with clubs and with the staff, I just think they developed and matured so quickly. And, you know, I really am so grateful for that. I think they have really good social skills, and I'll take credit for some of that, I hope. But I also say that experience has really helped them, and as has school and their community. But I do think that the club really reinforced that, and that was lovely. But I think there are a lot of things that go on which are quite hard for children to understand. And I do also think that sometimes the staff that the boys interacted with didn't have children and therefore didn't necessarily understand some of those thought processes. So a lot of what they were saying and doing, I thought was, you know, makes sense. Of course it makes sense, but put a child's brain into that mix and it's a bit different, you know, in how they interpret, what they hold on to, what they think based on the way that they were talked to. So some of those things around the way you're told something, I think sometimes the coaching can be quite tough. For some kids that's great, and for other kids that can dent their confidence. I think things around the decisions, obviously the retain and release is massive, but I think I'd really say my experience over the years is how well that process has been improved in terms of passing on that decision. But I think even if you do everything and you think as a club you've let that person know and they shouldn't be surprised, that's true, but that doesn't mean they aren't going to be shocked and saddened by the decision. And I think those are some of the things that I feel could really be improved upon, because not just for me, I mean, obviously with my two, I have experience of that, but talking to a lot of parents, they're surprised, and it's not because they don't know their child has perhaps been not doing as well or is struggling, but even if you get to a point where the child almost knows 90% I'm not getting the right decision, when they're waiting for that email or that phone call, it's back to 50-50. For them, it's 50-50. It could happen or it could not happen. And you can't stop that. That's the way they're thinking, there's still a little chance. And so there will always be that disappointment. And I sometimes think that some of the conversations have been that, your child should know, and we're giving you time to understand that, and, come back after the weekend, after the decisions. I think that's all really sensible, but it doesn't take away from how they feel. And I think it's different from sort of saying, do they need a psychologist or do they need some help with their mental health? No, that what they need is the sort of reassurance of the people that have been very close to them. And I think I see that at times the coaches, often have to pass on that decision, but then there's a sort of step back and hand it over to player care. And actually those relationships with player care, and this is one limited experience, but those relationships with player care staff may not be as strong as they were with the coaches. And actually I just think there's more that could be done in helping children process some of that. And that's just from talking to different people. And I think also because one of the big issues is that it's not just the child, it is the family, and knowing where those adults are in the picture is really important, because that has a real influence on the child. If you've got a really upset mum, I have spoken to really upset mums in situations, or an angry family member who feels really that they've been treated badly, then that's the child is experiencing that, and that makes it very hard for them to process it on their own. They know that my dad thinks that I should have got in, or so and so is really upset because they won't be able to watch me anymore, or I'm and I think we have to understand it more in terms of the whole unit rather than just the one individual child.
Absolutely. And Kate, sort of just touching on the parent experience there. Obviously, I know you speak to a lot of parents, and they often come to you and ask questions, that sort of thing. Tell me about what you think around the support that perhaps like parents can give at home. Anything else that you think we should be supporting ourselves to support our kids, and sort of understanding that influence that we have? What have you seen or heard, or sorts of questions that you think would be helpful to share?
To other parents, or to your own children, to other parents?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's some interesting stages. So for me, we went through the experience for both boys under 16 being released. So just before their scholarships. And I think for me, that's been one of the areas that's been the hardest. Obviously, it's hard because of the change. But I think for me, it was the sort of not knowing what comes next. So one of the reasons I think I like talking to parents, and I went back to Brighton and I did a session for parents, is that it's just reassuring people that there is life after the club that you've been in for 10 years. And I think I didn't really know that that was possible. And I've talked to parents who said if their son didn't get a scholarship, they don't know what they would have done, because they didn't really even understand that they could go to another club. And they hadn't really understood about the fact that when they're 16, they often go away and can stay away. So the idea that your child might be leaving home at 16. So I think for me, it was just sort of understanding the different stages in the journey, and that although we didn't deal with it, what happens when you're an under 10 who's released? The fact that you can go to another club nearby, but obviously there are restrictions on in which ones, but how you go about that. Like, I didn't have to do that. I had to do it at 16, but if I'd had to do it at 10 or 12 or 14, I have no idea how I'd have done that. Like, and at 16, I learned on the job. Like I had to deal with it at that stage. But I just think there is very little support for that bridge between club to club. So that's why I think it feels really overwhelming for people, because the what next isn't clear. And I think the clubs will tell you very often, you know, wherever you go on this journey, whether you stay with us or whether you end up at another club or whether you go off to do a scholarship in America or to become a journalist, you know, we hope you will have enjoyed your time here and we hope you'll have learned. That's all true. But how do I move on to the next club? How do I find out where to go next and what the next place is like? And is it the right place? And I think some of those things, are what make it very hard. And I know that clubs do a what next conversation at the beginning when they start, basically trying to manage expectations to say, you know, you might be here for 1 year, but you might be here for 10 or somewhere in between. And people take that on. But of course, when they're just coming in, they're thinking, I'll be here about it. I'm going to be here for defo, you know. So I think I think it's hard. And that's why I think it would be amazing. And this is, for me, Marsha, why meeting you and seeing you do all of this, it'd be amazing if there was that ongoing support. Because I think at under 9, you get told that message and then you get told it again when you're released. And the in-between bit, we're not really talking about what could be next. So it feels like you either get it when it seems very unrealistic because you're just starting, or it's when you're in the sort of like right in the middle of it and you don't know what to do. So I think that's why parents could really help each other with just sort of like the stories, help you understand, well, this is what I did. Like, and that's what I do is I speak to people and I just say, okay, I'll tell you what I did. Might be helpful, might not. And
so what did you do? So what did you do? Obviously, both boys were released at scholarship. Is that right?
Yeah.
So tell us about, first of all, how did that feel for you as a parent, and how did it, you know, if you can interpret how your boy.
So I think for Tom, it was a really difficult time. There's no two ways about it. He'd done extremely well over his 9 years. And had struggled to maintain the level that they needed at the under 16. Probably linked to not growing as fast as others and so on. So I think for him it was very hard because he'd never really had struggles, and I think we found that really difficult. It was the middle of COVID. It was a really difficult time. And as I said, I think we knew that it was not likely that he would get a scholarship, but there was always a little bit of hope. So there's no two ways about it. That was a really hard day. But the amazing thing is he just said, right, what's next? What are we doing? And that's where I had to think, oh my goodness, I don't know. What do we do? So, there was the opportunities that, clubs do, which is to produce a reel of footage of your child, a CV. They send it out. When the clubs make their decision, they let the rest of the world know these children are not being kept and this is their information. And you hope for the best, that someone's going to call you. It was COVID, so a lot of the clubs were closed. And it was a really, it was an unusual time. But we got a call from Huddersfield within half an hour, which was amazing. And a really, for me, a really important call, because it put hope back, but it also, they knew about Tom. They knew about what he could do. They were passionate about, discussing an opportunity for him, and they were so positive, and it was just something I needed. I just needed to know that somebody believed in Tom, and that was amazing, and that's where he is today. And
Same.
that call was really important. We got calls from other clubs, and we also were arranging for Tom to go up to Huddersfield and have a trial, and there were some other clubs that were interested in having him on trial. But he also went to the exit trials, which of course is the other part of the process at 16, which again, COVID, it was a very strange year. It didn't happen at the same time as usual. But he went to the exit trials and he had a fantastic day and he played really well.
Tell us about the exit trial. Like what just explain what the exit trial is.
So the exit trials, and I'm sure there's an expert who can properly clarify all of this, but my understanding is that they have the exit trials is a day in 3 zones of the country. So they have a north, central, and a southern site, and they run them consecutively. And scouts from all over the country will go to each one of those, and the boys get put in teams and they play short, 40-minute game or something. And they rotate the teams and then they rotate the pitches. So the challenge for me with the exit trial, which I think is something I had no idea about, was that you get put into a team with a coach, and Tom was in the first team to play and he was in his position and he started. So he got the full game time on the pitch and he played extremely well, and there was really positive reports. But there were other boys who were sub for that team, so didn't come on until the first 20 minutes had gone, by which time the scouts have moved to the next pitch to see the next game start. So it didn't seem quite like the system that was really working, in that children that were in the weaker team or children that were in a sub for that team could get missed, because the scouts all want to watch the first match, and when they've seen the first match they go, oh, there's another match starting over there, let's all move there. And you could see that we were a long way away, but you could just sort of see this huddle of scouts move to the next team. And I know from talking to friends who took part in that there were sons who just didn't really get looked at and didn't receive any feedback. Now you could say that's because of their ability, but actually I think they were disadvantaged by the teams that they were in. Now, I don't know how you can solve that, but I think there are ways you could time it so that at least the scouts are seeing everybody and not moving pitches. But the idea is that they have a southern, a central and a northern, and then once they've seen everybody, they then record interest in players, and the parents get a list with who expressed interest in your child. I think now you can go to more than one, but we just went to the southern one at the time. I think in COVID year we couldn't go to another one, but somebody was telling me that you can go to a couple. But then you get an email which says these are the clubs that are interested in discussing more. That point, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether I was supposed to call them or they were supposed to call me. I think probably the intention was that you contacted them, but that's quite a hard thing to do. And if you have a list, we had maybe, 8, 9 clubs that were interested. I didn't know which one to start with. Like, why? And if I spoke to one and they said, come for a trial, I'd be like, oh, do I go there before Huddersfield or after Huddersfield? And should I call that one first or that one? I don't know. And I still don't know the answer.
Difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's such a daunting, it must be such a I haven't been through it, yet, Kate. There's a possibility that at some point I may or may not. But it's quite a daunting process for a parent to have to go through. And especially if you don't know much about football or the industry and, so to have to navigate is... Honestly, it must be mind-boggling, and people will get lost. Youngsters will get lost in the system. It's just you need that parent support, right? I mean, do you imagine how your son would have got to the trials or known how to work his way around them if you haven't been there to support
truly him? And I think that's where, I mean, I think what's interesting is that, of course, those are structured opportunities that are offered to you, but it doesn't answer the question of how to navigate them. And we were fortunate with George in that when he was told that he wouldn't be getting a scholarship, it was earlier, and I think the club took a really good decision to say, we know that it was hard before, and if we've made the decision, we should let them know earlier, which for us was a much better way of supporting George to carry on. Both boys went back and trained at Brighton, but George didn't actually end up doing the exit trials because we started looking earlier, and I was much more prepared. As I had by then, I'm like, I know how to call up clubs now. Like, I've learned how to do it. So he actually had his scholarship offer at Ipswich before the exit trials even happened. So we didn't have to go through it a second time. But I do think they're quite a brutal. To only have that as your offer is really hard. But at the same time, how do you set up other things if you don't know the process? You kind of can rely on the exit trials. And if you don't have an agent, which you're encouraged not to have an agent until they're older, then who advises you over, should I call up this club or this club? Is this club got a better pathway than this club? And what is a pathway anyway? And does it matter where the first team are, or am I looking for the quality of the academy? And, all of these are things that I've learned a bit more about, which at the time you would have been, as they say, chasing the badge. Like, okay, we're leaving a Cat 1 Premiership club. We need to go somewhere similar. But actually understanding what the scholarship is and what it means and what it involves for the next few years, it's not as simple as to say we need to find the closest match to a Premiership Cat 1 club. Actually, you've got to think about where in the country, what's the education offer? Are there host families for them? Is it a nice place to live? Does the club really like the player? And is there truly space and a kind of, pathway is always this thing, but is there somewhere for them to move into, or is it just a giant pool of boys? So I think I feel that I learned so much from the discussions I had with Tom, even though it was an unusual time. I still was calling up clubs, having conversations with clubs, but I think it was more with George. I really stepped into it and said, right, I know how to do this. And, I had calls from clubs who wanted George on an 8-week trial. And I was just like, no, I haven't got 8 weeks to give to you for this. I've got GCSEs and, very limited holidays. I need to have if you want to have a look at him, it's got to be realistic. I can't bring him to you 3 times a week for 8 weeks. That would just cut us out of going anywhere else. So I think I became more assertive second time around.
And how difficult was that? I mean, it sounds like a mountain to climb. So you are calling the clubs.
Yeah.
Like how does anyone actually do that? Like, you look in the directory, finding, like, how are you finding that in itself? It's a big deal that not everyone could be in a position to do that.
Yeah.
Where did you find that?
Yeah.
That-
So when Brighton first sent out their clips, they send them out to a list. They've got an email list, and I asked for the email list, and I said so that I could follow up basically to say, can I send the clips out again? And the club were great. They sent them out, but at the same time, they weren't necessarily dealing with the ones that bounced and resending them. They just did what their job, which is to say, here's a child, here's his story. Do you want, if you want him, here's his mum's phone number. So I started to resend some of those emails, and many of them bounced. Many of them people had left already, or they went to info@so-and-so club, and I realized that it's not if I gave parents any advice, do not rely on those clips being sent out as some foolproof way that every club in the country knows about your son. That isn't the case. It can't be the case, because that list is not up to date every single day. There's always going to be somebody, or they bounce for another reason. So it's so worth taking your own, getting involved yourself in it. So anyway, I got that list, and then I also Googled. I'm now the queen of Google. finding people, doing my research, read an article. They've got a recruitment event. Oh, and there's head of recruitment. Oh, and there's his email. I'll have that. Thank you. Put that on the list. And I created a chart with all of the clubs. I asked the boys, which ones would you like to find out about? So we did a list. Particularly this was with George when we had the time. George did a list, and we talked about where would you like to, inquire. So we did email. So George wrote some himself. Hi, I'm George. This is the story. Here's my clips. I played against your team yesterday. I'd be interested to know whether you've got any scholarship places in midfield, for example. But we sent out to different places, and I have to say that a bit like for me, the Huddersfield experience was that phone call for them calling me, but the Ipswich experience was we sent a completely out of the blue email that landed on the desk of a new member of staff in recruitment who called me straight away. And it was just a moment that I won't forget, of George just said, I'm really interested in Ipswich. Would like to contact Ipswich. And I went, okay. So all right, fine. And we just wrote that email. And it's kind of serendipity that it just landed at that time, and that person was able to pick it up and, said, can he come on Saturday and play a game? And that's how it started. So I think it doesn't make it easy, because you're juggling. And so when you follow up on something, you might get a call from another club who say, can he come next week? But you're sort of thinking, that's not the one he'd really like. He'd like the other one, but I can't bank on them because they haven't got back to me yet. So I don't have the answer to that. But I did learn to be better at saying, really appreciate your interest. We're really interested in coming and having a look. However, I have got a few other irons in the fire, and we are looking to try and get other trials set up. So can I get back to you? And people were generally very responsive. And I think if they weren't, and there were a couple that weren't, or that demanded 8 weeks, 3 times a week, where we just said, if you don't see the bigger picture of this child is trying to find a new club, and you think that it's as simple as just informing us that we have to do this to get a scholarship, then you're not really the club for us. Do you get what I mean? It's just like, absolutely, if you're not understanding our situation, you really aren't the right place for us.
It takes a lot of confidence to be able to do that, right, as well, and and knowing or trying to figure out like what they're gonna think, is there gonna be another opportunity and so on. Of all of those emails that you sent, what were the surprises to you? So apart from someone wanting an 8-week trial, what kind of other responses were you getting? Perhaps that were less sort of favorable.
So it's interesting. I had a great call with a National League club who really, it was one of those ones where you talk to someone, you think, I really like you, you really get my son, you are honest about the fact that you're probably not at the level of which he'd consider at the moment, that there may be a better offer of a higher level club, but this is what we're offering, and we would love him to come down and try it out, see what he thinks. And I thought to myself, gosh, that was really attractive. And I thought to myself, I think this is where I really learned that when you're looking for that next club, it isn't just about the badge. Like, I always said, I've kind of given myself this story that for the boys, for their next step, I said, go somewhere where people will be excited about you again. Because I think when they left, there's no two ways about it. It's a rejection. It's you're not the right fit, you're not good enough, or you're not ready, or you're not the right position, or whatever it is, but you are basically not what we want right now. Or we're still deciding on you, but it's not looking good. That starts to chip away at confidence. So I said to them, whatever we get, you need to be somewhere where people are excited to have you. And I have to say, for both boys now, that has been the absolute joy, is finding places for them where they're thriving. They are so happy, and where I can tell that people are enjoying working with them and believe that they've got something that they can work with and is a bit special for them. And that's been amazing. And I think that really has been, I guess, really emphasized for me from those conversations. I could tell whether I was talking to somebody who had done their background work on my child and knew what they were guessing and had understood what the offer was really and what they could offer back. And there were other calls and emails which were sort of quite dismissive, or yes, you can join this exhibition game, we've got 100 players coming, but do you want us to put you on the list? And yeah, I did put him on the list, but I pulled him off the list because we didn't need it in the end. But sometimes it didn't feel personalized, and I don't think all the clubs can be personalized. As I remember, the scout at the event the other day was talking about the fact that it goes mad when everyone gets released. You can't possibly be everywhere doing everything. So I really understand that it's not possible for the clubs to have a personalized approach, but I think there is something about asking questions that show that they're not just sort of casting their net and just dragging in anything, that they've really thought about, actually, let's get in touch with this family because this boy is available and we like him because of these reasons. And so I always ask, can you, and the same when agents started to ring, what do you like about him? Like, what do you know about him? And it's quite telling when people can say, oh, well, I watched him play the game at Rotherham, or I watched him here, or I watched him there, and you go, oh, okay, you do know him. Or others who just say, oh, he's really nice and tall, and you're going, yeah, he is. Let's line that up. I like his shape.
I definitely want to dive into the age of in a minute, Kate. But you talked there about not chasing the badge, and just tell us a bit more about that and what, especially with the parents you've spoken to in the past, how do you help your child with that kind of the mental shift about you might be at a Premier League club or a Championship club, and the opportunities actually might be to move across or move down to go back up? Like, how do you help to communicate that with parents, and how do they help with their kids?
Yeah, I think the only way to do it is through stories. I think you have to tell the stories of other players, because to say it as theoretically, go to a Championship club or a League One club, and there's some really good academies, and you be the top dog there, and then you'll make it back up. It's like, oh yeah, sounds good. But if you talk about players who have done something like that, who've moved from National League clubs straight into Premiership clubs, under 21s, or players that have taken places at clubs that are, let's say, moved from a Premiership to a Championship club, but you you have the opportunity to train the first team, or you're in a different category academy where they do it differently. Huddersfield's a category 4 academy. It's going to open up a new academy, but when Tom went there, didn't have the younger age group. So that's quite a different offer to say, actually, there's no other players coming through. All of the players arrived new. So there was a set of 10 brand new players who all arrived from all over the country, many of them from high-level clubs that they just hadn't quite made the grade to get that scholarship. But so they were coming, there were players from lots of different clubs. So that was quite different. Whereas George, he went into Ipswich as the only new player. All of the others, 9, came up through the academy. So those are very different experiences, and you're going to get different players. You're going to get a different model. Huddersfield have this B team model. So you have to kind of you have to sort of use those examples and those stories to show that there isn't just one size fits all. And I think for me is observing that where you've got very large Premiership, for example, Category 1 Premiership clubs, which may be able to retain very large pools of players, you can use those examples to show that there are still people to follow the journey. So to take players that are currently in the under-21s and say who have just been released from under-21s from, let's say, a Cat 1 club, where have they gone to? They've signed as first-team players at League 1 and League 2 clubs. So just because they were in a Cat 1 Premiership club doesn't mean they're going to get a Premiership club pro contract. Not everyone can. It's impossible. So therefore, where are they ending up? So I'm a little bit nerdy about it, but I really enjoy just looking at the players that the boys grew up with and seeing where all of them have ended up and how different their journeys are, and how some of them are now professional players and some of them are still in very high level under 21s, and others have gone down to national, come out of academy, gone into National League, not even nationally, gone into kind of grassroots, non-league, and then gone directly back into Premiership clubs. So there's so much variety. I think it allows you then not to hold on to this idea that you have to be at the top level in the best academy the whole time, otherwise nothing good can happen. I think that's what I've really learned, and that's what I tell families. And I don't emphasize enough about how, and this is my personal opinion, the boys may say differently, but for me, the idea that you're in a club and you just hung on enough to get a scholarship and you stayed in, quite possibly you could turn that around and become the best player in the group, sure. But if you're only just sliding over the line into a club and you're always going to be fighting to get recognition and position and opportunity, compared to going to another club where you are literally, succeeding from the outset because you have something they need and something they're looking for, and perhaps it's a different level, but you become a different prospect really for the club. And I think that's what I've really appreciated with moving to be engaging now with 2 championship clubs, is very different conversations about what the opportunities are and what they hope to have from the boys over the years to come. And particularly Tom is now a professional, so has a professional contract, but just to see him doing so well and being so supported by the club, and they're proud of him. I really do feel that they're proud of what he's achieved in the time he's been there, and that's just a lovely feeling, because what's come out of disappointment and a loss, there's no doubt about it. You've lost a whole chunk of your life and those relationships and that structure and that identity, that it's given another opportunity, and he's really made the best of that, and he's done so well. And George is similarly in the process of doing the same, in that they're playing all the time. They're not on the bench. They're getting an opportunity to play, which I think, had they been in a club where they were just in, I see a lot of players who are in. I see players that are in those category 1 categories. They're not getting playing time, and it's hard for the boys to recognise that. But I see that as, if you're not playing, it doesn't matter where you are. If you're not being in the game, getting game time as a scholar, not really sure how that works for the future. So to me, to be a scholar who's getting 90 minutes every week, that's wonderful, and that's, long may that continue.
It is, and that's certainly something we'd love to do more on this platform, Kate. And you're helping just by being on this podcast, is sharing the stories and just hearing from others what opportunities there are, and be open to the world of football is much broader than the Premier League and the Championship and so on, and lots of opportunities out there. You mentioned about agent side of things. So tell me about your relationship with the business of football and how you've managed to navigate that so far.
Well, I think really what's interesting to me is that the message very clearly from the club from very early on was that you don't need an agent. And I agree with that, up until you need to start signing legal documents, really. But I think, for me, what's interesting, and I think the discussions that we had at the event a few weeks ago brought this up as well, is that you don't have an agent at 16, but you could get released at 16 and have to start looking for clubs. And I think that's quite a hard ask. And so having somebody that you can get advice from at that stage, I think, is really important. So you're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you don't want any legal formal arrangement with an agent 16 to 18. It's not really necessary. But at the same time, you could really do with some advice about, so-and-so club has called us and there's invites for a trial. What's the lowdown on them, and how are they fixed for centre mids, and those kinds of conversations. It would have been, in that sense, for people, I'm sure it would be extremely helpful. We had people that we were able to ask advice from, and so that part of it, I think it's tricky, because I think clubs don't want agents involved. That makes sense. But I think if we have that discussion, that actually it is about building a relationship early on, and not seeing this as something that's about a contract or about money, but is more about building a support team around somebody. So I think that, to me, is the most important part of that relationship with agents. I had phone calls, I still get phone calls about George, people wanting to know, what's their situation, and this is what we can offer, and so on. And I think it's a difficult world, because I think that there is, of course, a lot of good practice and a lot of bad practice. So you can't talk about it all in one thing. But I think, for me, what is more important than the legal and contractual support is more of someone who will call when you're injured, or someone who will advise you on these types of things. But it's nothing to do with trying to get... I think people think agents are about moving clubs and about contracts and deals and endorsements and so on. And I think actually you're wanting to work with people that really your child gets on with, and someone that they can get advice from, and someone who's got their back when things aren't great, you know. And I think that the sad part is that there are a lot of approaches done from very young, very, very young, that want to sort of lock in a relationship which is done on materialistic things. And I know that a lot of families get tempted by that, because kids love things. They love things. Like,
what would you say to parents that do get tempted by that? Like, what would be your advice to them? You know, they can get an extra...
a boot deal, or I don't know, some extra service, or tickets to go to Wembley to watch a game, or, you know, dinner at the Ivy is not going to get your son into the first team of a club. Like, it doesn't matter how many nice outings you can go on, or, I mean, I haven't had any of that. This is like, there's no, but this is my, there are lots of people that is the offer, is the conversations are around trying to sort of, I don't know, show people a good time. They're schmoozing. There's a lot of courting and schmoozing, and this is a lot more what people have talked to me about, and I just think the experience of when you really need people and what you need from them, it's different. And so I do think the relationships are the most important thing. I think being with people that you trust and people that you can call up anytime, and you know that they will just give you advice, but not try and take it off your hands. I think that's another thing, you know, not try and do stuff for you and say, don't worry about this, I'll fix it, but just talk you through things, I think is a really valuable thing. And you want things that have that longevity, so you're building that relationship. I still feel it's very early days, because, you know, Tom has his first professional contract, but the agent didn't get, you know, deeply involved in that because it wasn't necessary, and I respect that. And I know that that's very much from the agents that were talking at the event. It's a similar thing, is that there's no need until later, but I think it's hard when there's lots of ideas. Oh, I can get you to this club or that club, or I can move you. I'm still nervous about that world because I think it is really hard to know. And of course, people are experts in what they do. But there's never a guarantee with anything. Like, you can get a move to a club, but what happens when you get to that club doesn't mean anything. So for me, the advice would absolutely be people that you feel really comfortable with and able to ask questions, and that they will give you different opinions as well, you know, and that you build that relationship over time, and then it isn't about an event or a contract or something that needs to get done. It's just, you can test them out, feel them out. You don't have to rush.
I mean, that's a very good point. I'd love to just sort of talk about that for a minute, because I think it's a difficult decision, and I think some people do feel quite rushed by it. Sometimes that's because the agent wants them to, you know, to get involved very quickly. Another time it's because a parent is not done this before and doesn't quite know what it is they're actually asking for their child. And it can be quite a, you know, overwhelming process for anyone. But I think one of the things that sort of going through, you know, the process with my son is that the menu of options seems quite similar with the different agents, and you just don't quite know what you're getting, because they all sound great. I mean, I've met some wonderful people, as you just said as well, in the process, who I do feel like, you know, I could pick the phone up and have a chat to. But you're right, it's taken some time to get to that point, and for them to still want to build a relationship, knowing that actually it may not come to anything, or it may. I mean, who knows? But yeah, again, I think about the diversity of families who are going through this process, and just, wow, how overwhelming it must be for, you know, parents of different education levels, different jobs, you know, English might not be the first language, or you might be a lone parent at home, mum or dad. And and this is such a unique environment, but complex and sophisticated at the same time.
Yeah.
For for just any parents to have to navigate, it's quite a difficult one.
And I think it's difficult too, because generally you're looking at a time when your child is still a child, not an adult, and they're not making their own decisions. So it kind of has to be a joint decision, which isn't always straightforward. And I think, talking to other people about, and I think it was it Anna who, like, interviewing 40 Asians? I can't think of anything worse. It's that idea that, like, you have this sort of, you're trying to compare, because, like you're saying, like for like what is it about this one, and what's better, and what do they offer? And I just think it's overwhelming. And so I really think that there's been some really good people that want to support and I believe with really good intentions and know about the boys and interested in them and believe in them. But I still think you have to find something that fits the whole picture, not just that they think they can really help their career and get that sort of great big contract. I think there are some people that just talk too much about money and things and opportunities rather than what my role is alongside you. And I think that accompaniment, that sort of relationship, that has to kind of work for all the family really at the beginning, and certainly later they make their own choices. But as parents of a teenage child who's going to leave home, and suddenly there's the idea that the agents will have more involvement, observing, getting in touch, feeding back and something, that becomes quite an independent relationship. And that needs to be done with integrity and with a shared set of values around things. And I think that's why it's so helpful to build those relationships. And I think that sometimes it does feel that some people want to do it very quickly. And as you say, and and I think that can take away from taking the time just to build that relationship. So it's hard because you don't want agents coming in too early, but at the same time, you sort of want time to get to know them too. So I'm afraid I don't feel I'm an expert in that at all, but none
of us are. We're still trying to work it out, right? So Kate, we'll come to a close soon, but I just wanted to ask you, in terms of, again, I know you're very much of a go-to person in your club, and maybe other parents in other clubs as well. What are the three questions that you often get asked about this journey, the experience, and what do people want to know from you?
So I think people who are, it's interesting, people who are just starting out are often, which I think is so fascinating, are often already juggling clubs, right? So they've got like 8-year-olds who are in pre-academy at 3 different clubs, and they'll say things like, which one do you think I should pick? And I'm like, well, and I said, to be honest, you probably know in your gut which one you want to go with, but here's my 10 pence worth, is that you'll be doing this for a decade before your child is off doing a scholar, or perhaps is certainly more sort of taken care of and is living it away. You've got a decade of this. So if your decade you are ready to drive every night on the M25 and get home at 11 and not do that, go for that one.
That's what I'm saying.
we were, when Tom was very young, we were encouraged to consider a London club, and I just said, I can't do 7-8-year-old on. I can't do that drive. I just don't think it's good for the child to be in a car 3 times a week doing that drive. So we just said no. I mean, that was very early on when before he even started pre-academy. So, but it's just that sense of this idea that you should make the effort to go to the best club. But at 8 years old, 9 years old, I just believe, that great saying, cream rises to the top. The idea that if you're in a good club where you're being well coached and supported and looked after and are happy, if you're a good footballer, you will do well. And I don't think there's a sort of massive hurry to get to the top club, even if it requires a 3-hour round trip each night. To me, that doesn't make sense. You've got 10 years of this, make it work for your family. So I wasn't in a position to start driving even further with another sibling in tow and so on. So I think some of those decisions, some of those questions about which club, as if there's a ranking, is really, it's a bit worrying. But I think I get asked quite a lot for people who are just starting out. I think for people who are dealing with this whole release process, I think understanding that, I think the questions are often about, there's a reluctance to go to a lower level club. And I think one of the questions I get asked quite a lot is around being able to understand that there are academies that are extremely good, where their first team you may never have heard of. That this idea that the quality of the training you're getting in an academy may be very different from the first team's current form and current position in the football leagues, right? And that actually understanding the scholarship process is more than just playing football. They're going to have schooling. They're going to live in a host family. They're going to be, away from you. To think about all of that, not just, well, we can't really go from a Cat 1 and now end up in a Cat 3, or we can't go from a Premiership club to a League 1 club. Well, if the environment is right and the quality of the training is good, then I think, you have to think more holistically. And I remember poring over things like, I discovered that productivity rating, this idea that the academies get ranked in terms of how many players get through to the first team. And that productivity ranking is not perhaps what you would imagine of certain clubs. It doesn't run in the order of the football leagues. There's actually some quite interesting places where you go, I didn't realise that they seem to have a really nice pathway into the first team. So I think learning some of that, I think, is important to sort of try and push away the badge, the blinkering of the badge issue. And so that's often what I get questions around, that part of it. And I think the questions I get from people who are not parents of footballers is also quite interesting, because I think there is a lot. And so for me, it's important to share for parents of footballers is that there is always a judgment about being in an academy. I think no matter what stage you're at, if you're going in young or you've been there for so long, or they're doing day release because they're not doing GCSEs in the same way as everyone else, or they're not going to university, there's always judgment. I felt for a lot of people, they're kind of excited and interested in the fact that the boys have been in academies, but they've also been many people who've been very judgmental. And so I think for parents who have boys in the academy or girls in the academy, I think being able to see for yourself and feel confident in yourself that if your child is happy and enjoying it and they love their football and you enjoy being it, and as a family it works, then you can make decisions all along the way that ensure that you are not stealing their childhood or stopping them seeing their friends or missing out on things or jeopardizing their education. I mean, lots of these.
Or waiting for them to buy you a house.
Or waiting for them to buy you a house.
I know.
Yes, it's so true. So you can actually, I think you can sort of steel yourself a bit and feel, I've done my work, I've done my due diligence on all of this. I'm not going into this blindly. I think some people do go into it blindly, but I think understanding that you have thought about the welfare of your child at every stage, you've thought about their, how they feel about themselves and about the football, that they're getting something that's of value, that it's not damaging or compromising something else, but is enhancing, then, to feel confident in that and enjoy it and not feel bad. And I think that's easy to say and hard to do, because I think a lot of the time I do feel like that. But I think it's kind of interesting to me, because I think since Tom has now turned what was a overly ambitious hobby into a career, which is the beginning, he's only just starting, but he's now a paid job as a footballer. I think people are now excited for him, and there were lots of people that didn't think you could do that and thought we were somehow, but we didn't care whether he did or he didn't, but he did, and he's doing well now, and whatever happens next, and no expectations that it has to be, this has to happen next or this has to happen next. But what we're saying is that we've had a great ride so far. He's got a job. He's being paid to do that.
He's paid, yeah.
It's all good, for now. And then we'll deal with what comes next. So I think some of that is important for parents to do things with your eyes open, but also to stand by yourself and say, I'm doing it well. I'm not just a sucker that thinks this is like the pink Land Rover's coming my way, which is what people always think I'm getting. But that actually I'm doing this with intention, and I'm doing it with care, and I have values that underpin all of it, and I won't compromise on those. But yeah, if it's good, I'm just going to enjoy it. And there's nothing better than going around the country into stadiums and seeing your child on the pitch. And it's just been, I wouldn't give that back at all.
I love that. And you know what? I was going to end with, what's been the highlight of your journey so far, but you just did some really beautiful things. I'm going to ask you anyway, if you could pick one for each of your sons.
I mean, Tom's had a very exciting one, which, I can't get away from it. It brought tears to my eyes that he got his professional debut at the Etihad Stadium against Man City in January this year. And, it
Amazing.
Was 6 minutes of pure joy and ecstasy. I think it was more that it was just such a tangible sense of achievement after all the struggle. And for him to know that, he got on a pitch with Kevin De Bruyne. Like, whatever happens after this is and of course the journey's only just started for him, but in the new part of the journey, but just that was just a wonderful thing to experience, and to go as a family and be in the stadium and hear his name called out. I think it was special,
Wow.
So I can't pretend there's another. There are many, but that was a very special one for Tom. And I think for George, actually, it was this experience of him finding the random email to Ipswich to watch someone who he knew that he was leaving quite a long time before he did, but he took it with such sort of confidence and positivity. To watch him go off and play get first game for Ipswich as a trial and play so well, something that I don't think he had done for a while, because I think, being in the process of being released, you dip, you're not yourself. To see him come out on that pitch and play an absolute blinder and just think they really like him and think this is his place, it was just lovely. And it's just it was a great feeling to think we have the next chapter now. We know what it's going to be, and let it be a great one. So I think that's probably my highlight for George.
Amazing. I mean, your sons are very blessed to have, parents like you as well. full of wisdom and knowledge, and open to new learning, and hopefully we can bring some of that to the platform and some more parents, because it's been wonderful to speak with you today, Kate.
Well, thank you for all you're doing. I just think it's so needed, and it just talking, it just really helps people, and there's no two ways about it. And you can't answer everyone's questions, but you can just listen and kind of be alongside them, and that's a great help, I think. So that's meeting you and having these conversations is a great help for me too. So thank you.
No, thank you, and welcome to the community. And yeah, lovely to have you, and thanks for being our guest on Behind the Foods.
Thanks.